Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring a YouTube video and looking at how one of the speakers uses English.
Oh, cool. What's the video?
The video is called Easy English Podcast, talking about past simple tense of to be. And in it, a woman from the US named Kate talks about her favorite and least favorite types of movies.
Okay, so what are we looking for in this video?
Well, as we listen to Kate talk about movies, we're going to try to pick out interesting things about how she uses English, like how she uses the past tense of the verb to be.
That sounds like fun. I'm in.
Awesome. So Kate begins by talking about how much she loves fantasy movies.
Oh, like what?
She specifically mentions Avengers Endgame and Lord of the Rings, movies with like amazing worlds and really exciting stories.
Right, the big budget action movies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she talks about how exciting they are. And I have to admit, I kind of get that. I love a good fantasy movie that just sweeps you away.
Yeah, they can be really fun.
But here's where it gets kind of interesting. You know how she loves fantasy movies? She also says she really enjoys biopics. And she brings up First Man, the one about Neil Armstrong.
Oh, wow. So she likes stories that are both like totally made up and also based on real life.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting. Like, maybe she's just really curious about people and, like, what they go through, whether it's in a fictional world or based on real events.
Yeah, maybe. I wonder if those two genres have something in common.
Good question.
Now, on the flip side, she's really not a fan of romantic comedies.
Really?
Yeah, she thinks they're pretty unrealistic. She even said one she watched recently was just terrible. She thought the plot was boring and the acting wasn't great.
Oh, I think we've all been there. Seen a movie and thought, come on, that would never happen in real life.
Totally.
It makes you think, why do some people find those kind of predictable, cliche stories comforting while others find them, like, annoying or frustrating?
Yeah, I guess it probably says a lot about what we expect from movies and even our own experiences with love and relationships.
Interesting. So then there's horror movies. And Kate's feelings about horror are a little more complicated.
Okay, how so?
Well, she says she actually likes them but finds them genuinely scary, especially when she's watching them in a dark movie theater.
Yeah, I can see that.
She even shared this story about watching A Quiet Place with her friends, and it completely freaked her out.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that one got me too.
So now she says she prefers watching horror movies at home with the lights on.
Makes sense. I mean, our surroundings definitely affect how we experience a movie, especially one that uses sound or the lack of sound to build suspense.
It's true. The same movie can feel totally different depending on where you're watching it and who you're with. Like, a dark, quiet theater can really amp up the fear factor. But at home, with the lights on, it might not feel as intense.
Makes sense. Now, as we go deeper into what Kate's saying, let's take a closer look at how she uses the past tense of to be to explain her opinions of what happened.
Okay.
For example, she uses phrases like, the script was excellent, or the special effects were impressive, or even the plot wasn't interesting. So we can see she's using the past tense verbs was and were a lot.
And it's interesting how she uses those simple verbs to create such a vivid picture of her experience, right?
Definitely.
It's almost like she's painting a picture with her words, and was and were are like her brushstrokes.
Oh, I like that.
For instance, when she says, the cinema was dark, it's not just a statement of fact. It sets the scene for that whole scary movie experience she's describing.
You're right. It creates the atmosphere.
Exactly. And then when she says the actors weren't very good, it's clear that she's not just making a neutral observation. She's actually making a judgment based on her own understanding of good acting.
That's a really good point. So even those little words, was and were, can carry a lot of weight. They help us understand her perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's something we can all learn from. It's not just what we say, it's how we say it. Even the tiniest grammar choices can change the meaning of what we're trying to communicate.
Exactly. It really makes you appreciate how powerful language can be.
Yeah, it really makes you think about all the different ways we can use language to get our point across.
And, it's not just about grammar either.
What do you mean?
Well, like you were saying, Kate uses those simple verbs, was and were,
right,
to like paint a picture with her words.
Right.
It's almost like she's sharing a story.
Oh.
And it's not just about the words themselves, but it's the way she puts them together.
Okay, yeah.
It's like an artist using different colors and brushstrokes to create a painting.
I see what you mean.
Each choice, like each word or how she structures a sentence, it all adds to the story she's telling.
Right.
And in Kate's case, using was and were makes what she's saying sound really authentic and real.
It's true, it does.
And you know what else is interesting? It seems like we can learn a bit about Kate's personality just from how she's talking about these movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she seems pretty smart and thoughtful.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like she's really thinking about what she liked and didn't like about each movie.
Mm.
She doesn't just say, I hate romantic comedies and leave it at that.
Yeah.
She explains why she doesn't like them, you know? Like she finds them unrealistic.
Makes sense.
Like she's actually analyzing these movies and not just watching them for fun.
That's a good point.
And she's inviting us to kind of analyze them with her too.
Yeah.
It's to like think about these movies on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Which I think is what makes this podcast so interesting.
I agree.
It's not just like a grammar lesson or a movie review.
Yeah.
It's like we're getting a peek inside someone's head.
Right. And how they think.
Exactly.
So it's like learning about movies, but also about how people process and make sense of them.
Now, speaking of how people use language,
Yeah.
the podcast hosts actually touch on something pretty interesting.
Okay, what's that?
The differences between British and American English.
Oh, right, right.
They use the words film and movie as an example.
Yeah, and I think the host said that British people tend to say film more,
Right.
while Americans usually say movie.
Yeah, although both are totally understood no matter where you are.
It's so cool how these little differences in the words we use can tell us so much about where someone's from or their background.
Definitely.
Like, even though they mean basically the same thing.
It's like a little clue to their culture and history.
It makes you wonder if there are other words Kate uses that might give us a hint about her being American.
Oh, for sure.
What do you think?
Well, it's not just the words themselves, you know.
Right.
It's like how she puts sentences together or the idioms and expressions she uses,
Right.
even her tone of voice.
Oh, wow.
All those things can add up
Yeah.
to create a certain style of speaking that's connected to her cultural background.
So it's like a whole package, not just individual words.
Exactly.
Like, I've heard that Americans tend to be more direct with their language,
Yeah.
and British people might be a bit more formal or polite in how they say things.
Right. Exactly.
And those little differences can tell us so much about someone.
It's true.
It's like we're unlocking a secret code to understanding her better.
Yeah. I love that.
Now, before we move on,
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about how Kate's really thoughtful about how she analyzes these movies.
Okay.
It's like her use of was and were is doing more than just describing stuff or saying what she thinks.
What do you mean?
It's like she's also using those verbs to highlight things that are different or even contradictory.
Right.
Which, like, adds another layer of depth to what she's saying.
I think I see what you're getting at. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Remember how she talked about watching A Quiet Place?
Uh-huh.
She said, the film was scary, but I enjoyed it.
Right.
So she uses was to talk about how she felt in the past,
Yeah.
scared. But then she uses a present tense verb, enjoy, to talk about how she feels about the movie overall.
I see. So it's like those two feelings are kind of clashing.
Yeah, it creates this tension between how scary it was and the fact that she still liked it.
That's a really good example. It shows how those simple verbs can actually communicate something a lot more complex.
Exactly.
Like she's trying to figure out her own reaction to the movie,
Yeah.
recognizing both the fear and the enjoyment.
I wonder how much of this is, like, intentional.
What do you mean?
Like, is she choosing these words on purpose, or is it just how she naturally expresses herself?
That's a really interesting question.
It makes you think about how language and thought are connected, you know?
Totally. Like, which comes first, the thought or the words?
That's a big question.
Right. It's something that's puzzled philosophers and linguists forever.
Do you have any thoughts?
Well, maybe it's not so much about one coming before the other, but more like they're both happening at the same time, kind of influencing each other.
Or like they're working together.
Exactly, like a dance between thought and language.
Oh, that's a nice way to think about it.
So as we keep listening to Kate, let's keep that in mind.
Okay.
Pay attention to how she's expressing herself, like the little movements and choices she makes with her words and grammar.
Right.
It's like she's painting a picture of what's going on in her mind.
I love that.
It's like we're getting a private glimpse into her thoughts as she watches these movies.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it reminds us that we're not just learning about Kate's opinions on movies, we're learning about the power of language.
To, like, shape how we see the world.
Exactly. And ourselves, and even art itself.
Wow, this deep dive has really taken us on a journey, hasn't it? From fantasy worlds to, like, the nitty-gritty of grammar.
It's amazing how much we can learn just from listening to someone talk about movies.
I know, right? It's like we've been peeling back layers, not just of, you know, what Kate's saying, but also of how she's saying and what it all means.
Yeah, and makes you realize that language is so much more than just words. It's a tool for understanding, for expressing ourselves, for connecting with others.
So before we wrap things up, what are some key takeaways you'd like our listeners to really think about?
Well, first I'd say pay attention to the little things, like how people use language can tell you a lot about who they are and how they see the world. Even simple words can be really powerful.
That's such a good point. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of that from now on.
And second, remember that learning a language isn't just about memorizing rules. It's about exploring, experimenting, and finding your own voice.
I love that. It makes language learning sound so much more fun and exciting.
Exactly. And speaking of exciting, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Okay, I'm listening.
The next time you watch a movie, think about all the different elements that go into making it. The story, the acting, the music, the special effects. How do they all work together to create a certain feeling or atmosphere?
That's a great challenge. It's like we're not just watching a movie, we're becoming like detectives, trying to figure out how it all works.
Exactly. And by understanding how those elements interact, we can really deepen our appreciation for the artistry of filmmaking.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. Thanks for guiding us through it.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those deep dives going.